Welcome to video number 12 out of 16 of the Citizens Policy Center training. Allie and Patrick are going to be going over binding violations with you during this episode. Brought to you by the Specialty Insurance Agents of Florida. Be sure to check them out at siaof.com. This episode was sponsored by Insurance Zone Direct, helping agents own an independent insurance agency. You want to know more? I suggest you contact David Wilson. You can call him at 904-885-9797 or send him an email at dwilson@insurancezone.com, or you can visit their website at insurancezondirect.com.
Sure thing, Allie. Remember that Policy Center will not send a submission to underwriting until all those required documents are uploaded. So since we're talking about documentation, we do need to talk about binding violations. Binding violations only apply to those policies that you have binding authority for. Binding and late submission violations were tracked, and we found that out of approximately 235,000 new business submissions, only about 3,675 binding violations were issued. An introductory period was allowed from March 2013 to February 2014. This allowed time for the agency and all staff to set up best practices to avoid binding violations. To help, we provided training and assistance to affected agents and staff, which included reference materials listed at the bottom of each notice sent, training calls from agent compliance to discuss the nature of the violation, and resources available to avoid the violation in the future. There are 4 types of binding violations. Let's look at each one. The first is circumventing the required document submission process. This is where the agent knowingly circumvents citizens' required document submission process in Policy Center by submitting incorrect, incomplete, or unacceptable documentation. For example, they submit a Word document that says photos to be submitted soon and calls that photos. That's going to be a binding violation. Or if they submit a 4-point inspection over 12 months old, both of those would be binding violations. The second type is the ineligible risk. The agent does not submit sufficient documentation to establish that the named insured meets citizens' eligibility requirements. That would be the no offer of coverage or 15% rule. Binding violation 3 is an uninsurable risk. The agent submits an application for a risk that is uninsurable as defined in our underwriting guidelines for that policy form. For example, a risk where they submit a 4-point inspection that's over 12 months old could be considered uninsurable. The 4th binding violation is premium posted to an unbound risk. Should anyone, the policyholder, the agent, the premium finance company, or the mortgage company submit a payment on a policy that is before it has been bound by underwriting, you will receive a binding violation. So it's very important to wait for that official notice of approval on anything that's submitted unbound. Also, please note that you could receive multiple binding violations on a single risk. For example, if the risk is submitted with a 4-point inspection over 12 months old, that could be a violation of the required document submission process and make it an uninsurable risk. So what about late submissions? Well, from February to November 1st, 2014, there were 10,060 late submission violations issued. Citizens Underwriting Guidelines state that all documents are to be submitted electronically within 5 business days of the effective date of the submission. After that, the system will automatically create a late submission violation. These late submission violations cannot be disputed. So since we're talking about the binding violations, we need to discuss the disciplinary actions related to them. Here's a chart that comes from ATB 21-13, where you can refer back and see all of the details about what the 4-part disciplinary process includes for issuing for binding violations. Now, in Policy Center, there is going to be a new process for disputing binding violations. You will receive your binding violation in Policy Center, and that'll be an activity on the desktop. Another reason why we recommend that you're checking the desktop at the very least every day to find out what communication is coming from underwriting. If there's a binding violation activity on the desktop, you will need to respond to that. And the process for disputing that violation is detailed in the job aid, Disputing an Approved Binding Violation.